Welcome guys, in today's video we're going to learn how to make the classic rumble techno kick drum. Let's jump in and find out how. So the first thing you want to do is select a selection of high quality kick drums that you know and trust to be good. Do that through picking samples or creating your own kick drums, whatever works, but make sure you use good quality inputs that you will drive through your rumble techno kick drum chain. This chain right here is going to be available to you in the link below. There are some third-party plugins which you'll see, but you can swap these out for other things that you do have. Okay, I'm going to turn off the rack. I'm going to play you through some of the kick drums I've got. Now, you'll probably hear they sound all right. They sound good-ish, but there's a couple of things in there we need to tweak. But by all accounts, these are kick drums that would probably sound good and that are good candidates for having that rumble effect chain applied to them. So let's jump into the effect chain and see how it works. First thing that we do is we drop in multiple chains, one called top, one called dry, one called verb, and one called delay. The dry is going to be the dry kick drum, as in there's no other effects applied to it. All we're doing is running it through a utility, and then it's running into an EQ to have a resonant peak taken out at the top end here and the middle kind of low mids. So round about 305 Hertz and 5K. That's all we're doing for the dry kick drum sound. So let's just play that through. Very, very slight effect there. You can't really hear the EQ too much, but it is making a difference overall. Next thing we're doing is we're creating a top version of that kick to let it punch through with the overall sound of the kick drum. So all we're doing for that is running it through an EQ8, rolling off everything below 1K, compressing it, doing sidechain compression, quite extreme sidechain compression to the kick itself, to the kick signal itself, running it through rectifier preset at 33%, and then using OTT, dialing through 17%, but the two things we're doing are we're keeping the low boost or low gain at 0. It by default comes at above 0. The other thing we're doing is pushing the time out, and that basically shortens the compression effect, if you like. I'll show you what that sounds like in a minute. So let's have a listen to this now. Just smacks the overall kick drum through, and in any case you might not need it, but it definitely helps overall when we've got the sound. So I just want to show you the OTT. So the time function is really, really useful. If you want it to be quite short and punchy, drive that time parameter up. And conversely, if you want it to remain neutral, then keep it at 100%. I'm not going to play you through what a rectifier sounds like. You probably know what saturator sounds like, so let's just move on. So key things here are the verb chain and delay. I'm going to take you through the verb chain step by step, then we're going to jump into the parameters and the kind of key techniques that I teach my clients and how to use to get more out of your rumble sound. So let's just listen to how this sounds. And if we listen to it with the overall kick drum. Okay, so let's jump into this and go through what we have. We're dropping on a reverb, turning up to 100%, jumping into a OTT. Again, we're pushing that time parameter above 100% to 193, and we're dialing through 14% overall. We're then going into a plugin that I like to use to give a little bit of distortion and bit crushed effect. So I'm using the shape function here to dial through a little bit of wave shape on the tape setting, and the bit rate is down at 77%. Next thing we have in EQ, and you can use EQ8 if you don't have this. We're boosting around 194 Hertz and then taking out peaks at 072 and then up at 5K. Next thing we've got is a Kickstart 2 plugin to sidechain the rumble sound. And that's all we have going on here. So I'll turn off everything so you can hear what everything does line step. There you have it. So you can hear quite clearly what everything is doing. Now I want to jump into the reverb itself and the things that I've done to achieve this sound, and also the macros on the left here and how you can change them to get infinite different sounds. A couple of things that you want to do. So when you drop in a reverb, there's a few things you're going to need to change. One of them is the diffusion amplitude, or the amount of diffusion. And this comes set at 0 dB. You want to push this up. I've got this pushed up to 4.7 dB. You can hear quite clearly what that's doing. It adds a bit of density to that diffusion sound, that rumble sound essentially. You want to have the wet signal up 100%. Next thing you want to do is, on the stereo setting, it will come as default at 100, which sounds like that. Now that sounds okay to most people, but if you know how sound works and you know how low end works, and if you were to play this at a club on large speakers, that you're probably wanting this sound to be mono, or mostly mono, okay, because it is a rumble low end sound. The mistake I see a lot of people making is leaving this up at 100% or 100, and it just makes the overall kick drum sound a lot less powerful and weaker. So that's a top tip for you. Now, I've tried this millions of times, maybe not a million, but thousands of times, and for some reason 44.06 seems to be the magic number for that. Don't ask me why, but it just seems to work. Okay, couple other things. Turn off spin, turn off chorus. They don't actually enhance the kick drum that much, and I much prefer them without. Of course, if you decide you like them, then by all means, keep them in. The shape should be at 0.5, which I believe is default. Smooth setting fast, density low, which I believe is default as well. So once you've got that set up, you're ready to start tuning everything else. So first thing you want to do is jump to the pre-delay. Okay, so the pre-delay is what gives it that offbeat syncopated sound. The pre-delay in the box default will be set at 2.5 milliseconds, which sounds like that. But if you want that syncopated offbeat rumble sound, you want to be pushing it up to around about 144, which gives you that offbeat syncopated sound. Now you can move this up and down and you can get different sounds. So if I was to do this live, you'll see what I mean. $147 is again one of these magic numbers with pre-delay. It seems to work well, so make sure you take a note of that, or take a mental note of that. The next thing that you want to jump on to is the input filter. Again, I'm doing effects outside of these chains to shape the overall sound, but just leave that on high cut and leave the low cut off. Okay. The next thing that we want to go to is the well, actually, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Next thing we want to go to is the decay time. So the decay time for me generally is best around 1 to 2 seconds. If you turn it up past that, maybe that's what you're looking for, but typically I don't think it sounds that great. So let's just listen to how it sounds now. Let's just turn this up. It's up to you, but beyond a certain point, there's actually no effect. It doesn't really do anything, but it's up to you. For me, 1.2 seconds sounds about right. Next thing they want to do is jump into the diffusion network. Okay, and we're going to be turning on the high cut and the low cut. There's this function here which allows you to choose. It's essentially a shelf, and you can bring this down. For me, to get the sound that I want, you turn that, I think if you leave that at default, which is around about there, sounds alright. But if you want to get more shape and more attack and groove, bring this all the way down to 0. Okay, that's top tip. Just remember that. Next thing we want to jump onto is the actual diffusion network filter setting. So at what point it rolls off the frequencies. So I've got this set at roughly 189 hertz. Now, depending on what sound you're going for, you might want something that's a bit more hardstyle or a bit more gritty. Then you probably want to leave more of the kind of mid and high frequencies. But you can get quite crazy sounds with this. For me, I don't want to go over the top. Roughly about 100, 150 to 200 hertz is a good place to be. Okay. Now, you can also boost the band number 1 here. For me, I've left this at the default, which I believe is that. It may not be, but I've left, oh, it is 0.75 is default, so I've left it as that. You can boost this up if you want to, but there's no real mileage in that, I feel, but it's up to yourself. Okay, so once you've set the profile of this diffusion network, you can then dial up the diffusion amount and the scale, which is these two parameters here. Now, this definitely changes the sound. For me, 50% diffusion and 100% scale works really, really well. But I'll play around with both of these parameters, and you'll hear the different sounds that we get to. So you can get quite different but similar sounds by playing around with the diffusion amount and the scale. But I've found that the sweet spot is sitting here. You can also choose the this frequency here, which controls band 1, but I've just left it at 90 hertz. Okay. Now, the other things that you can control in the reverb, and one of the things that gives it the most impact and changes the style the most, is the room size. Now, this is the one thing that I have left at default because it sounds pretty decent at a size of 100. So if I move this around, you'll hear the different sounds we get once again. again, you get totally different sounds in the different positions and different room size amounts that you dial in. So hopefully this run through of how I use Reverb and tell my clients how to use Reverb has been useful for you, because I know sometimes in other videos we don't actually go into the different parameters and what they do. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play around with all of the different functions here and show you a couple of different sounds that we can maybe get to. And then we can move on from there and we'll get on to the delay section. So let's do this. So playing around with a couple of the functions, we've got a completely different sounding kick drum. Sounds similar, but it still sounds like a different kick drum. So let's just do that again and see where we get to. Yeah, once again, move a couple of the parameters around and then you can get a completely different sound. I have a lot of fun with this, and I know when I've worked with various different people and shown them the power of the Ableton Reverb and how much dexterity and malleability you can actually drive into the sound just by these different functions and manipulating the different parameters. It's really good. So hopefully you take a lot out of that, guys. If you have any questions, just drop a note below. Okay, so the next thing I want to go on to is the delay chain, and this is really, really simple, standard stuff. There's nothing kind of miraculous going on here. All we're doing is we are dropping in a delay. By the way, I've macroed this so that it turns the delay on and off. It turns the chain on, and it also controls the wet amount, because I don't always want the delay rumble sound with the reverb rumble sound, but you can combine them, and I'll get onto that in a minute. So we're using a standard delay, okay, and I think it's set to this beat division time. You can also choose this. You can take it off sync and move it about. We're leaving it on 50% feedback, which is again default. We're bringing the filter all the way down to 50 hertz, and then we're using this macro to control the width, the bandwidth. Next thing, we're using a OTT, and we're not really doing a huge amount here. We're leaving the time at 100%, but we're using a lot more or a lot higher amount on this. I'll explain why I've done that in a second. Next, we're using a Kickstart 2, and then we're finishing with an EQ just to take off anything below 30 hertz and also boost around 97. Okay, let's have a little listen to this. Press solo. And turn off each of the different plugins that we've got so you can hear. Again, we start off from a dry kick drum. Turn on the delay. Turn up the width. Sounds alright like that. OTT. It really suppresses some of those mid frequencies that come through. which I find helps with the motion of the overall kick drum. I'll show you what I mean when I play this with the dry kick drum. Kickstart. Again. We can drive that all the way up to 100% if we want a really extreme sound, and then finally the EQ. And this is just to give it a bit of prominence in the low end, and also just to take off any of that immediate low end. So if I take this off solo, turn this off, and then unarm the Verb chain, and then just dial this up. You should recognize that classic sound. It's very, very basic, but it works. And you can use an echo, the Ableton Echo in here, which I don't have because I'm using Live 12 Standard, but you can use this and you can play around with it even more and use the reverb in there. I'm just using simple delay, and that's what you get to. Okay, so what you can then do is you can say, well, I'd like to have my reverb chain going through, but I would also like to have some of my delay chain going through as well. And to be honest, playing them together actually works pretty well. But what I would say is, and this is another top tip, and I'm not sure if this has been shown before, but because you're playing essentially two different instances of the same kick drum, okay, you need to be careful that things don't get muddied and you don't overcrowd the kick drum, and therefore, by default, by extension, the mix. So sometimes it works, and in this case, because we've got this multiband compressor, it kind of squashes down the delay rumble so that it doesn't kind of overcook the kick drum and take up too much space, you know, because what you really want to do is listen to these together, the verb and delay together. So they tend to work pretty well together, which is fine. But if you're finding that sometimes it doesn't work the best together, then what you want to do is you want to sidechain the delay rumble to the verb signal. Okay, so that can get a little bit complicated doing that, because you're going to have to bounce out the verb signal by itself and use that as a trigger for the sidechain to the delay. Now, I'll be honest, I've only had to do this a few times, or to show people to do this a few times, when they've used a kick drum that's very powerful and they want to have a really banging reverb, but they want to also have like a knock and delay. I've advised them to do this technique that I'm telling you, and it's managed to just bring the kick into overall better alignment. In this instance, they work pretty well together. So I've got a couple other kick drums here, and I'm just going to play you through them with the rumble rack. Now, of course, different kick drums require different treatment, and the kick drum that we use, the settings that we've got really work for this, but every kick drum needs its own treatment. So what you want to do is each kick drum that you've got, you want to play around until you get the sweet spot for each kick, and you'll get a really great sound. Now, what I like to do, once I've got a sound that I'm happy with, I'll bounce it down to audio. But before we do that, I just want to take you through some of the downstream processing that I've got to bring the kick into the final sonic state that I like it to be in before I bounce it to audio. So we have a bass mono. We have enabled, but we're also using the mid-side function and reducing that down. I'm going to turn off all of the other processing. Turn it off. And that's how it sounds. Bass mono, drop in the mid side again to bring it into that mono focus. Doesn't make a huge amount of difference, but you really want it is to be as narrow and as powerful as possible while maintaining a kind of full sound. It might be that you just want the bass mono, but for me, that's what I've done. Next thing, we're using a glue compressor. Very important, makes a massive difference. Let's sort of listen to before and after. So we're not adding a huge amount of gain here, we're just changing the shape. So we've got a very slow attack of 3, we've got a very quick release, we've got the threshold down enough to move the needle up to -5 dB, and then we're driving up the makeup ratio of 4. So we're getting that slamming compression sound, and it really just emphasizes the kind of initial transient of the kick. And it allows the overall kick to just fit nicely. You could probably get away without it if you didn't know you needed it, but it's massively important in my eyes. Next thing, we're going for a little bit of harmonics and saturation using the twin tube. Again, nothing exciting here, just dialing up the the saturation. Again, very slight amounts. I'm not trying to overcook this. And a little bit of harmonics. Next thing, we're using an EQ8. I mean, I've used an EQ8 this time. I would normally use my Kirchhoff EQ, but you can use EQ8. So for this, we're taking out around about 141 hertz. We're using a low shelf just to bring it down some of that sub energy, and we're boosting some of the mids. Makes a massive difference. And again, you could probably not have this, listen to the kick, think it sounds good, but until you've put it on, done the processing, you probably don't know you need it. But there you go. Good old OTT, nothing crazy here. Everything is as default, 14%. We're boosting up the time, so it's a lot snappier. And then finally using a limiter and just crank it up, almost using it like a maximizer. And that's how you get to the final sound. So as I said, guys, the next thing that I would do is I would take the overall chain, freeze and flatten it. Or I would record this into an audio track, bounce it down, whatever works for you. So I'm just going to be lazy. Well, I'm not going to be lazy. So let's do it properly. So let's take audio in from kick channel, record that in. And there we go. We can see the kick drum in audio, and we can now save this as a sample, or do anything we want with it. So guys, hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Hopefully you've found some additional tips and techniques that maybe you weren't aware of. Maybe you use similar techniques, but maybe there's a few things in here that you've learned. So hopefully that is the case. If you have any questions, post below, leave a comment. Please also like, share, subscribe, all of that jazz. And of course, guys, if you want help with your music production, you're feeling stuck in the loop, you're feeling uninspired, you're lacking creativity, you keep on hitting a brick wall, you just need someone to hold your hand through the process and help you build really good music and realize your potential. I'm the guy. I've helped hundreds of producers over the last 6 years do the exact same thing. So if that sounds like it could help you, follow the link below, book a free discovery call in the link below, and also check out the producer incubator as well. That's it for just now, guys. Take care, and I'll see you next time.